Space Marine 2 has a lot of mechanics that aren't the best explained. Sure, the tutorial will give you some of the basics, but unless you're like me and was given a chat that actually knows some of these mechanics, it's possible that you could go through the entire game and never encounter them or abuse them, not even once.
Here soon. Okay, we're gonna save our medical stim.
I've never played a Space Marine game before. I've barely even played any third-person shooters before, but nevertheless, these were extremely helpful to me. And to force myself to get good at these mechanics, and off of a $50 bribe from my live stream chat, I created a sort of challenge for myself to go through the campaign on the hardest difficulty. And to show off what I'm going to talk about here, I'm going to show you one of the fights that happens about 30 to 40% through the campaign with the Carnifex. Obviously, you have the base mechanics of your forced dodge attacks with the orange glow, the counter dodge attacks, which we will not see here, but I will talk about them, as well as things like finishers and executions, but there's also things such as ammo and healing and armor, which we will also get into. First off, before you do anything within Space Marine 2, the very first lesson that I learned is to make sure you take a look at your surroundings before you engage the fight. Sometimes you won't know what actually starts the fight, and sometimes the fight will already be going while you're in the middle of, doing what you need to do. But regardless, make sure that you take your first attempt, or maybe your first couple attempts through, to just simply learn where everything is. Space Marine does not do a very good job of highlighting things in the room. You're gonna have to go out of your way in order to find them. And on top of this, there's actually more that the game won't even show you unless you're aware of it. This is something that I started to realize later in this fight with the Carnifex, but I will go ahead and show it here. These boxes, you might have seen them throughout your playthrough of the campaign or maybe through Operation, and you might not know what they did. You might have just assumed that they were just part of the environments, some bit of environmental storytelling or whatnot. No, most of these boxes will contain either ammo or grenades, and when you're on the hardest difficulty like me and solo, every piece of ammo you can get, as well as every single grenade you can get, is vitally important. Now, on to the fight itself. This enemy is big and it's fast. It's a real pain in the butt to fight, but it's absolutely doable. Obviously, just like with Dark Souls or any sort of game that has any sort of dodging mechanics or cover mechanics, learn the enemy's AI. The very first thing I latched onto when I got into this fight is that this enemy actually will do his ranged attack with very little startup, so I have to keep my eye on the enemy the entire time. He doesn't even have a sound to tell me when he's starting up, unlike the counter mechanics as well as the dodge mechanics, which will put this high-pitched squeal into your ear, sort of like a shimmer, I guess, sort of sound, which is very useful so that you can keep it in your peripheral of your mind without actually having to keep eye contact with the thing. But nevertheless, this ranged attack is a big deal. I learned that just simply dodging left and right, one right after the other, ultimately ended up being the most successful to me. Quickly, let's talk about the actual counter-attack mechanic first, as we are not going to see it here. This is an option for this fight, but I ultimately decided that it's just safer for me to stay away from the beast that was bigger than an SUV and just simply shoot it down. But if you did decide to get within close and melee range of this enemy, as well as any enemy, so long as that enemy doesn't give you that red glow, you can block and potentially counterattack. The closer your timing is for the actual counterattack press, the more likely you are to actually get a proper counterattack off and stagger the enemy. Most attacks will just simply be blocked, whereas the blue glow will be a more distinct counterattack option. But regardless, even this enemy here can be counterattacked, or at least blocked, to stay out of the danger from melee-based attacks. Next, let's talk about a really critical mechanic, mostly that happens within the campaign, and that is to heal a mortal wound. Titus, by default, has his Frenzy ability, which allows him, when he pops it, to slowly regenerate health over time, which speeds up faster the more damage he deals. It's great for being able to get yourself back into the fight, and on the Angel of Death difficulty, that window to get your health back from dealing damage is virtually non-existent. It happens, but more or less by accident, as it's so small, you're not really able to play around it. But Frenzy will push through that regardless, and most importantly, it's good to know how to use stims. Stims will heal you a flat chunk of your health. Obviously, that's kind of what they're made for. But what the game doesn't go out of its way to tell you that well is that if you're near full health, or if that stim would heal you to full or more while you've already received a mortal wound, it will remove the mortal wound from you, allowing you to go down potentially one more time and get right back up. Think of stims while you're playing Titus or a character with Frenzy as effectively an extra life. And in that vein, you should consider using your Frenzy after you've received your first mortal wound, so that you can heal it back up and effectively give yourself a 1-up mushroom. Armor is another way of mitigating damage, obviously. But again, the game doesn't go out of its way to tell you that this armor effectively operates as a separate health bar. So long as you have any bit of armor left on your character, whatever chunk of damage would have been taken will be eaten by that last bit of armor. As you can see from this fight, so long as the instance of damage is one hit, it will only take away just that armor, meaning that let's say you had only 1 point of armor health and you took that 50 damage shot, you would actually just have 100 health. This is very valuable when you're fighting enemies that do a lot of damage all at once, as getting executions off on the smaller guys, which is something you can do by the way, gives you that small bit of armor or that small bit of health to get you back into the fight for potentially one more hit, which can be critical. While we're talking about executions, did you know that while you're engaged with most executions, you have iframes or invincibility frames? In a fight such as this that is so frenzied and, chaotic, this can be really good to dodge a big attack that's coming your way. It's important to note that the animations for these executions and such are often far longer than the iframes that they give you. The iframes tend to take place roughly within the middle of the attack, but when you're leaving it, you're going to be exposed for a bit. Also, in my experience, I've noticed that the gun execution, for lack of a better name, I don't remember what it's actually called, it doesn't seem to offer you any damage resistance or iframes at all. Worth keeping in mind, but you'll see as we get later into this fight that I'm often trying to grab executions or counterattacks on the smaller enemies just simply to dodge the fury and the SUV charging at me within this room. And lastly, a very helpful piece of information: the perfect dodge. While you're in your dodge and the enemy is charging at you with one of those red-based attacks, you have, again, a small portion of iframes, which may make how you engage in these fights a little bit different. You might have seen that as I was starting this fight, I was trying to dodge back and away from his slam. So he sort of has his charge directly at me attack, his SUV style attack, as well as his lunge and slam type attack. I started the fight and I started going through this simply trying to dodge away from that. But what I learned is that he has sort of a hitbox around him when he pulls his claws out of the ground, which often ended up resulting in me taking a small chunk of damage, even though I was very far away from what would be his character model. So instead, I found it a lot more valuable to try to time a perfect dodge through the damage box and through the hitbox of the enemy. As you see me getting later here, the charge attacks are much less of a problem, as I can charge directly through this enemy in order to get to safety on the other side. The shortest distance between 2 points is in fact a straight line. And if you can get good with the timing, this is absolutely the most powerful way to avoid incoming damage. It's worth noting, of course, that you could be dodging further into enemy territory, so just keep in mind where it is you're dodging. The Carnifex in particular seems to get stunned whenever he charges into a wall, so staying near the edges of the wall was a good strategy for me to get some extra chunk damage in. But all of this pales in comparison to Space Marine's last and perhaps most BS mechanic, and that is good old spaghetti code: bugs. This room, in its current state, in its current patch, doesn't work too well. It has some problems. You may have noticed a handful of times I've died was seemingly odd. Like I would try to dodge out of something and then just get stuck on nothing. Well, yeah, this room, and I'm not too certain about any other rooms, but this room in particular has very destructible terrain. Destructible terrain in general doesn't seem to remove its collision, and we've even tried resetting the game a number of times, and that didn't fix the problem either. So if by some miracle some dev is watching this, please fix this room. I've ended up losing most of my lives just simply because I was trying to dodge back into nothing and getting stopped. And then, pile drived. It was not a good time. Overall, I hope these help you out. If they did, like, subscribe, leave a comment below if I missed anything. I hope you guys enjoyed. Bless your faces, and deuces.
I know the shit.